Alright guys, so let's talk about the US economy. There's a very good chance in 2025, this year, we could be entering a recession. Now this is not to scare you but to share why the odds of one is rising fast. And if the US economy contracts, the world economy is next to fall because we are still in a synchronized system. And in this video, I'll make it very simple to digest why we might be heading off a cliff, leaving the eye of the storm into the disaster zone, especially with the policies of Donald Trump guiding the way. Now, I've been following the Atlanta Fed's GDP Now forecast for years, and it has been pretty accurate. In the latest revision of Q1's GDP, it's very ominous. We have gone from positive 2.8% growth last year to negative 2.4% this year. The economy is expected to contract. This is an incredible swing of over 5% in a single quarter. We aren't even factoring in the effect of Trump's trade war yet. And if the US economy contracts, this will have disastrous consequences for everyone. And needless to say, the first victims will be Americans and their jobs. A contracting economy means less spending by consumers, and this will trigger a snowball effect that will ultimately drop the hammer on job growth in the US. In fact, we could see massive layoffs, and that would lock the US economy into a downward spiral where people earn less and they spend less. Because company profits also drop, they are forced to either slash pay or slash their headcount. And as it stands, private companies in the United States are not adding enough jobs. In February, US firms added only 77,000 positions. In the previous month, private payrolls grew by 186,000. This is a very big drop. It's the smallest gain since July last year. Wage growth is also stagnant, so people aren't exactly earning more. Going forward, we can expect more pressure on jobs, especially with Donald Trump throwing around all these tariff threats. And if your company is really risky to hire more people, in the months ahead, countries could retaliate back on US exporters. And this can come in the form of boycotts or counter tariffs. And either way, companies could see their foreign sales collapse. And it makes sense why they are getting really defensive with their hiring. Now, since Biden took office, the US economy has been kept on life support, and the ventilator providing oxygen was government jobs. He hired a ton of government workers. But this trend is starting to reverse. Since July, government payrolls added on the federal, state, and local level have been collapsing. We have gone from 50,000 jobs added to just 30,000 positions. We haven't even counted on what Trump has been doing with Doge. He and Elon Musk, they have been cutting tens of thousands of federal workers over the past few weeks. In fact, we have many disturbing estimates of how many positions have been axed away. According to Challenger and Gray, the US government has slashed away at least 62,000 jobs so far in 2025, which means federal job growth could very well be negative in Q1. The US economy is consumerist. Almost 70% of GDP is driven by private consumption. And if private and federal workers start losing their jobs en masse, they will be too broke to buy anything. A dollar from the private or public sector is virtually the same. If you rug pull away enough jobs, it would trigger a spending collapse and hammer on corporate profits and earnings. We can already see a crisis building up in one of America's biggest consumer markets, which is the auto industry. Americans are falling behind on their car payments at the highest rate in decades. Delinquencies on auto loans are spiking to new incredible highs, hitting 6.6% in January 2025. A ton of people are at least 60 days late on their car payments, and this stems from just higher interest rates alone and the pain of sticky inflation that just isn't going down fast enough. Imagine how bad things can get if mass layoffs hit, and whether it's federal or private workers, the end result is the same. Loans get defaulted on and suddenly the banking system starts to freeze up.
They're saying that announced February layoffs, not actual layoffs, but announced ones, rose to 172,000, up from just 49,000 in January. It's the highest monthly number since July 2020, the worst February since 2009. In a research piece suggests total job losses from Doge could be as low as 50 if the government eventually gets back to hiring, or as high as 660,000 in a worst-case scenario created by what it calls Doge policy uncertainty.
So far, we've only talked about the domestic crisis happening. To get a better view of the carnage coming, we cannot ignore the global tariff war that Trump is waging. Now, just yesterday, Trump delayed his tariffs on Canada and Mexico until April, but the hit is still on China. And we have to take Trump at his word. His vision for America is all about turning inwards. He wants to reshore production back home at any cost, and US importers are taking him very seriously. In January, the US trade deficit hit an astounding record of $130 billion. Domestic companies are busy front loading their buying from Canada, Mexico, and even China before the tariffs hit in April. Just look at the incredible spike in Canadian imports. And this presents a big problem. When importers buy stuff overseas, it doesn't contribute to local GDP growth. In fact, it counts against the figures. When the US front loads their buying from, say, China, money flows into the Chinese economy and helps Beijing's GDP, not Washington's. So in February and March, throughout Q1, we can expect more outflows of money to America's biggest exporters. The money won't be circulating within the domestic US economy. So the GDP print could continue to stay negative or even collapse further into the red. And these are the direct consequences of Trump's trade war. Now, the situation could continue to escalate. We aren't out of the woods yet. The big bazooka, reciprocal tariffs, are still on the table on April 2nd, which would affect almost every country on planet Earth.
As President Trump has said many times, tariff is his favorite word. I would say that reciprocal is probably his second favorite word. And I think we have to be open to the idea, if you want to be a numbskull like Justin Trudeau and say, oh, we're going to do this, then tariffs are going to go up.
So it's quite evident that tariffs will be imposed on the world unless they drop theirs. But here's the problem. Countries are showing a lot of backbone. From Canada to China, countries are less willing to be bullied into submission, which could result in the US punishing the world. And this could plunge major economies into recession. At the very least, we could see a domino effect of global layoffs. Exports to the US could collapse, and so would the jobs behind them. Now take the tariff war on Canada and Mexico for example. By itself, Trump's 25% tariff could cause Canadian jobs to crash by 1.3% from the baseline, 2.3% drop for Mexico. But if both countries retaliate with the same 25% tariff on the US, job losses could hit anywhere from 2 to 4%. It would devastate consumption in both Canada and Mexico. As a result, it would boomerang back on the US economy. People will be too broke to buy American goods, which are very overpriced, and those unaffected will also suffer a cost of living crisis. They would either scale back spending or find cheaper alternatives, or just outright boycott US goods. So this won't end well for Trump's economy. It won't be a victory. China also isn't going to back down. We have multiple press conferences that showed the Chinese leadership standing up to the US. And here's a direct statement from Beijing. If the United States persists in waging a tariff war, a trade war, or any other kind of war, the Chinese side will fight them to the bitter end. Now, with this statement, China has signaled to the world that they will resist, and there are so many ways this can play out. They could cut away critical minerals, they could boost domestic consumption and push their people to buy local products only. They might even accelerate their US Treasury dump as well. And if they do all this at once, the US could face a combination of higher inflation and rising bond yields. And how is this good for the domestic consumer? And here's more evidence that even the US government knows they are playing with fire. Scott Bessent is warning of a detox period for the US economy. The US economy will be transitioning away from public spending. In other words, the US government is going to cut down their deficit and shift to the private sector. But if domestic inflation soars and countries all over the world they tariff US goods, where is the additional spending going to come from? Bessent is spouting economic theories from the Twilight Zone. And secondly, there's also no Trump put for the stock market, and that means the Trump administration is prepared for a market collapse. The S&P could drop by 20% tomorrow, and Trump will be out playing golf in Palm Beach, Florida. You don't need a PhD to put two and two together. Trump and friends are willing to tank the US economy, plus the stock market for a great reset. Now, whether the reset will be successful or not is a different topic. But in the meantime, Scott Bessent is still very confused about the situation.
The U.S. does not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We are right where we have been in the long-term averages, 17.5%, 18.5% of revenues. That hasn't changed. What has changed is this blowout spending.
If Trump persists with his trade war on the world, the US economy will have a revenue problem, namely from the world. Domestic consumption is already under tremendous pressure, but so will foreign consumption of US goods. The global pushback will not be kind. For the S&P 500 companies, 29% of their revenue came from non-US sources in Q2 last year. That basically means foreign buying. Do you think that will rise or drop if Trump goes pedal to the metal? Will foreign buyers be thrilled to support US companies when their own exports are getting punished? Really something to think about. Now, we know the narrative being floated around that there's no game in town except for the American economy and US markets, but really be wary of the risk floating. Don't be surprised if we get a dreadful collapse in the months ahead. But let me know what you think. Is the US economy on the brink? And can Trump and Bessent work a miracle out this time? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.